The state of education in Michigan. Tonight, the superintendent of schools sits down to talk about the changes and challenges. And a busy end of the year in Lansing, what lawmakers are deciding on. It's all right now on MiWeek.
Michigan's turnaround is being powered by things we do better than anywhere else in the world. Today's global leaders routinely turn to Michigan to work on their most difficult problems. That's because the engineering talent in this part of the world is simply the best. So many possibilities lie ahead for Michigan's future. These opportunities are here and starting to happen. The vision for the new Michigan. Share it, talk it up, drive it home. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Welcome to MiWeek, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. A busy week as we head closer to the holiday. Last-minute deals in Lansing are making for some pretty interesting debates statewide. We're going to take a look at what lawmakers are scrambling to do. But first tonight, we focus on the state of education in Michigan, from school districts that are operating with a deficit to legislation that would hold back third graders who can't read, to teacher evaluations and the expansion of the Education Achievement Authority. What does education reform really look like, and are we on the right path? We recently sat down with State Superintendent Mike Flanagan for some answers. We have 55 school districts that are operating at a deficit, and we saw what happened at the end of last year with Buena Vista and with Inkster and the fact that they had to be dissolved. Where is the conversation right now at the state level about consolidating districts and looking at the countywide districts?
Well, you know, I appreciate actually some of the folks sitting right here, both papers, for supporting the idea that I was trying to get on the table. We don't need as many districts. We certainly don't need as many ISDs. We've kind of changed the position in the sense that if ISDs can't offer it, then their district should be allowed to go somewhere else. Where does it stand legislatively? I think all this other stuff has taken the air out a little bit for now. So I'm disappointed that there doesn't seem to be any legislative activity around that.
All right, so when you say other stuff, what do you think is the top priority right now that the legislature is focusing on? We're talking about teachers, and we're also talking about literacy for third graders, correct?
That's right. I mean, the third grade reading bill, for instance, I think we helped get on the agenda that you need to learn to read by third grade, and then you read to learn from there on in. So it's certainly the critical point for if you had to pick one education measure. But I don't think automatic and mandatory retention is the way to go, and that bill's being taken up as we speak.
But Mike, Michigan retains fewer third graders than most other states, particularly the states that are more successful than we are in education. If a child isn't reading at grade level by grade 3, should you just automatically promote them? What's the answer if it's not retention?
No, you're right, Nolan. It may be retention for some kids. My only issue is it shouldn't be mandatory because the parent and the teacher, they can best see this. I'm glad the legislature is taking it up. I think there is a role for some law to say, what do you have to do? What are the supports you have to put in place? And if a kid isn't there, but you know, to just say across the board on a one-day test that you're back a grade. And besides that, there's really a lot of evidence that retention can actually do more harm than good. So it's really got to be done thoughtfully.
So what supports do we have in place to make sure that...
You know, I've been state superintendent for 8 years, and there's a little bit of a catch-22. We're a local control state. So we make suggestions, if you want to put it that way, about what local districts should be doing. Most of them have reading specialists. Most of them look at their data now. I mean, I was a local superintendent in Farmington Hills 20 years ago. We didn't look at data. So, I mean, things have gotten better in that sense.
But Mike, before you can, I mean, you talk about it, looking at individual cases, and I agree with that. There should be some discretion, parents and administrators and teachers and what have you. But we don't yet have an effective measuring system for student performance in place, and that's another issue the legislature's taking up. What should that look like?
It should. We need to get rid of MEEP. I mean, it's outdated.
So what do you replace MEEP with?
Well, you know, I'm going to carefully say this because we think the only thing in the pipeline is something we've been working on for 3 years called Smarter Balance. But we just did a report to the legislature. Sounds like a what?
A butter.
Butter, yeah. We probably could rename. We are going to rename it, by the way. Whatever we get, whether it's Smarter Balance, ACT, because as long as they have something aligned to the Common Core, now that we're through that battle, we need a test that aligns to the Common Core. We want to move it from the fall to the spring, so you actually can measure growth during the year. It will be a growth measure. But I want to be careful again. Smarter Balance is the only one we know that's going to be ready. If others are ready, we're going to have to go for bid anyway, and we'll take whatever the...
Will it move us away from a test that measures sort of rote learning, memorization,
Yes.
and toward sort of aptitude and...
Even more, yeah, aptitude, but the complexity of the sophistication of these tests now and what you can do, it's like everything else that's changed in the last 10 years. We can get right down to where a kid is, and then you can eventually tie it into a fair measure for teachers. I'm for teachers being evaluated, but not with the current system. The only way they can be evaluated fairly is, have you gotten growth over time with your kids, you know, on average.
And one of the advantages of that Smarter Balance test and those other tests is that they are nationally normed, so that you're not just looking at how a kid does on the test, but how they do in comparison to other kids around the country.
That's right, Stephen. I mean, this will be the first time, because when kids are doing well in the MEP, you don't know what that means in terms of, I mean, look at some of the international stuff that's come in. I'm always a little embarrassed, I guess, you know, because I'm thinking, crap, I've been doing this and we're still in this situation where internationally we look very weak. I would say this, and it may sound a little defensive, we do educate all our kids. We do test all our kids. I've been to Finland and to study their system. It's half the size of Michigan. There's really no poverty to speak of. They're very good at getting high-quality teachers. It's such a prestigious profession there that they just get the top of their class. We recently, you may have seen, this is my call, and I changed the cut scores for getting certified as a teacher. It's much tougher.
And hang on, I do want to throw out some of the numbers on that, so we all know what we're talking about. The recent state certification exams, only 45% passed the math portion, 31% passed the writing, and the overall pass percentage was 26%. So what does this say then about the college programs and about the preparation for these teachers?
They're weak.
Because the numbers are hurtful.
Right. First of all, we have 32 of them, so I probably should back up a little bit. They're not all weak. But they should be accountable like everyone else in the system right now. They're the only folks that aren't. So we've redone our ratings. I last year took action to close down part of Lake Superior State's program and part of Olivet's program. And I'm not afraid to do this with others if they don't get their act together. Because what they do then is they send, we have 100,000 teachers. We're picking up about 4,000 or 5,000 new ones a year. You put them in a classroom and they're not prepared, and then they're under a very high accountability system where you can be fired if you're not getting student achievement growth. They have to be connected. So back to the testing for a minute. We can even do this year where we can connect the dots between, let's say, all the science teachers that were prepared by Central Michigan. And you can loop it back to, are they getting student achievement growth? And then you'll be able to say, well, what is it if Central turns out to be the best for science education? It's not a punishment model. It's, well, Eastern, you better be talking to Central. Michigan State, you better be figuring out what they're doing.
But we're still training way more teachers than we need, right? I mean, should we not be closing down some of these schools and consolidating the best programs?
Well, if I was a higher ed commissioner and we had a different constitution, that's what would happen. But they're independent and they're allowed to have a program. But here's the deal. The change in cut scores is automatically going to move us probably from producing 8,000 a year to, let's say, 5 or 6. So we'll reduce it. I do want to clarify one thing, though. In fairness to this is a very small sample, this first test. So I wouldn't panic about that. And in my view, a little bit of this is still on the teacher ed institution. We told them 6 years ago we were going to do this. And then suddenly, to some of them, it's like a surprise that we've changed the cut scores. You know, a lot of folks didn't have any problem with us changing the cut scores for kids, where it was harder to do well. But my gosh, let's not change them with where higher ed's going to be rated.
I want to ask you about the EAA, which is operating in Detroit with 15 schools now. There's a lot of pressure to expand that to other districts, more schools. Is that a good idea?
Well, you know, we have the role in the department to decide what goes into the state reform district. And at least for now, we're still vetting schools, but my plan is in the next week or two, we will name some schools that will go
Name some other schools that'll go in?
But they'll go into the state reform district.
Okay.
And the reason I'm kind of trying to clarify that language is I'm somewhat agnostic about the EAA. The thing was the Granholm law, which puts schools into the reform district, is now coupled with kind of the Snyder mechanism for the EAA implementing or operating them. And, you know, the jury is out a bit, but I've been there and I'm hopeful. I mean, I've seen their...
Do you feel like that the things you're seeing in those EAA schools represents improvement?
I do. You know, I think there's a lot of controversy.
It's early, though. I mean, you got to give them some time.
But here's the way I'm looking at it. If let's say we're probably going to name fewer than 10. And they'll be around the state. They're not just...
Not just in Detroit.
Right. And by the way, if they're in Detroit, that's up to the emergency manager whether or not they actually go.
But they're all failing schools, right?
That's my point. I mean, we're only going to do this first year especially if there's absolutely no improvement in 3 years. So what do you got to...
So why not shut them down, Mike? We got, particularly in Detroit, you have way more seats, classroom seats, than you need. You're taking your worst schools, instead of shutting them down, you're spending all this effort to rehabilitate them. Why not shut down those schools and then move up the line a little bit and make schools that aren't so bad better?
Here's the catch-22, and without, again, we're vetting these right now. I'm not just holding back. And if we don't vet them in time, we won't do them by the end of the year. We need to make sure we get this right. But there's one, for instance, that it's the only school of that. It's the only high school.
Public high school.
In that particular,
public high school.
Right.
Are there charters or others that would serve that community?
I'm just saying that to close down the only public school there, it doesn't automatically mean there'd be the capacity in surrounding charter schools.
There's a lot of talk about school quality. How many traditional public schools have you shut down for poor quality, for poor performance? Just completely close the doors.
Well, we really don't have the authority to just shut them down. So what we do have the authority under this kind of combination. I mean, what I'm hoping is, as we speak, I'm hoping the legislature will take up and codify the EAA. Because here's a hesitation I have. We're going to do this once we finish the vetting. But I have to admit, I mean, we need codification because, so how do they get out? There's no clarity about how they get out. When do they go back? Because many of these schools will improve under that model, at least that's the hope. And the second thing is, what if they don't improve under that model? Do I take them out of the EAA and put them back in the EAA? I mean, so there's still so many questions to be answered, and they need to codify this.
And to some degree, it's that we're going about this piecemeal instead of from a comprehensive perspective and saying, let's figure out, you know, what the standards are for getting in, for getting out, and apply it statewide.
Right. But we talked about my preschool grandkids. The schools that we're vetting, I wouldn't have them in that school. So no kid should be in that school.
Right.
This is just, to me, the simple bottom line on the whole thing. And we'll get barraged in, you know, particularly some communities that might not be expecting it.
But Mike, how many years have we been talking about performance, reform, you know, pushing up new models for education? Why are we still here sort of flailing around looking for something that works?
Well, I mean, Nolan, in general, we are improving. I mean, the one measure, until, as Stephen said, we get the more common measure in Smarter Balance or ACT or something, is we do have a component of our overall system where it says everyone takes the ACT, and that is going up regularly. You get what we used to have, course content expectations, where teachers knew for the first time, here's what you have to teach in Algebra 1 for them to be ready for Geometry or Algebra 2. That kicked in. The Common Core was delayed. I mean, I was frustrated for 6 months with the legislature, but we're past that. That's really going to make a difference. The fact that I think the reforms, piecemeal as they may be, they've had an impact on trying to move us along. I worked well with Governor Granholm. One thing I like about Governor Snyder is I think there is a metric way to think about things, to hold each of us accountable. So that's helping. If you look at the measures, we're going up.
What about graduation rates?
Graduation rates, to me, not that we shouldn't pay attention to them, but I'm always a little suspect because you could graduate a kid who doesn't deserve a diploma. And I'm worried about the combination of a graduation rate with some confidence that the Michigan Merit Curriculum been attained, that they can demonstrate that on tests. That's the other big thing, by the way. The Michigan Merit Curriculum is not a small issue. It was listed as one of the 2 best in the country, Massachusetts and ours. So you get to a point where you realize we've got the right pieces. I think in terms of the EAA, we need some legislation to get this done once and for all. If it's not the EAA, that's for them to fight out, I guess. But we need a place to be able to operate. We can't operate them at a statewide level. But there are some schools that they're not improving under any circumstance, and it's only a handful. And I do want to say this. part of the reform problem is teachers are feeling demoralized, and we can have a catch-22 here if we're not careful, where people won't get in the profession because they're feeling overly blamed. Most of this is systems issues that we're correcting. It's largely not the teacher in the classroom. And the few that probably should have another profession, so be it. You know, that we've got now an evaluation system in place. But that will not work if we don't have a fair testing system connected with it.
So talking about evaluations, what grade would you give Michigan's education system right now?
I'd say a B minus. I think we're heading to a B plus. We're certainly above the C grade anymore. I mean, I'm really happy to see how we're doing in terms of some of the things like I mentioned. Massachusetts gets a, if I can just say this, I saw Chuck Ballard from MSU. He gave a speech the other day, and he said, you know, everyone talks about Massachusetts. He says, they're lucky. I mean, the nature of all the higher ed institutions they have and the kids that already are performing in great.
But Florida's also showing up now on folks' radar screens in terms of making education strides, and you wouldn't consider Florida to be in that Massachusetts
I agree with that.
category. I mean,
we're doing some of the same reforms, as you know. We're a little behind them. Some of theirs started during Jeb Bush, and we're a little
but how much does the political process slow you down, Mike? I mean, you're in a unique situation. We've got an elected school board, but the governor controls the budget. The legislature controls a lot of the policy.
I'm a constitutional officer like the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, and I just do what I think we need to do and let the chips fall.
Let the chips fall. You know, last year at this time, excuse me, Lansing exploded with right-to-work legislation, and this end of session is causing some heated debate as well, centering around education and the EAA, as you heard, and insurance coverage for abortion. And since we've been talking about education, let's start with the EAA. Stephen, let me start with you. Do you think this is finally the right step to codify this?
I think it needs to be codified because the fact that it wasn't made it very difficult to know what it was, what the standards were. A lot of the transparency problems, I think, owe to the lack of legislation actually making that part of state law. I'm less enthusiastic about the idea of expanding it quite yet because we just don't know whether it's working. We know that there's some improvement in the schools that are in it, and that's good, but it's slow. And I think you got to give them 3 years to actually show.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, how long? 3 years?
I think in any school, and I covered education for most of my career before I wrote editorials. I think anybody would tell you, you need 3 years to really tell whether an educational program is taking root and having the effect that you want it to have. It's too early to claim success or failure before that. And so everybody, the critics of EAA are too early saying that it's a failure. The people who are trumpeting this saying, we found the solution, let's put it everywhere, are also too early. You've got to give them time to show what they can do, and so that we can learn how to either stop the failure or grow the success.
Do you think there should be a cap on the expansion of this, Nolan?
I've been skeptical of the EAA from the beginning. And, you know, as I asked Flanagan during that interview, if these schools are failing, if they're the worst schools in a district that has too much capacity, why not just shut them down and work on schools that are a notch better? Or, given the fact that there's such an amount of quality school choice now in Detroit, you have good quality charter operators out there with empty seats. Why are we spending this effort and this money on schools we're not certain we can fix? Shut them down and get those kids into good schools, and don't waste 3 years of their education.
But the problem in Detroit actually is that there aren't enough good schools. There's a lot of choice in Detroit. There's a lot of options.
And aren't we looking at almost over 50%? Over 50% are not in Detroit public schools right
Absolutely.
No, that's true. But look, you know who the good operators are. You know the quality charters. We don't.
But there are not enough of them.
Bring them in then.
Well,
why not bring them in instead of fool with this fixing schools that are dismal? This is a very costly, lengthy exercise.
But this is also an exercise that in other states, and again, we're really bad in Michigan at looking at somebody else's success and figuring out how to get some of it for ourselves. We always want to reinvent the wheel. Look at New Orleans. Look at what New York has done. Look at what they're doing in Maryland. All of these states have these kinds of recovery district efforts where they take the lowest performing schools and they turn them around. You have to do that because in a lot of these areas, it's very difficult for kids to get from one place to another, to a new school that may be further away. You want to give everybody a quality choice option in their neighborhood.
In New Orleans, they picked one model. They shut all the schools down
and
went
started
to
over.
Complete charter system. We're trying a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We've got half a dozen different models going in Detroit. I'm not sure that's productive. Pick one and go with it and ride it and commit to something that might actually work.
All right, I want to jump to what the legislature was talking about this week and talking about a rider for abortion coverage for insurance and the Citizens Initiative. Talk to me a little bit, Stephen. I want to back up. And people may not realize how this even came to be, and the fact that the legislature can just vote on this and the governor can't veto it.
Well, it's part of our goofy initiatory petition.
And goofy is a technical term.
Yeah, goofy is a technical term when you're talking about our Constitution, which I'm going to bring it up again. We had an opportunity to go into the Constitution and fix all this stuff several years ago.
Or make a
Lots
big
of
mess.
people, including my friend over here, said, no, we don't need to do
Every wacko in the
that.
state would have been out of the woodwork.
There's no question.
Trying
But
to
now,
get their piece of the Constitution.
Okay, but the bottom
instead, we
line
have the
is you had-
wackos running the state
You had over
through a bad
300,000
Constitution.
signatures that fast-tracked this to where the legislature has to make a decision, can vote on this and put it directly in.
Yes, without ever having a majority of the people take a look at it and decide for themselves, which I think is pretty undemocratic. 300,000 sounds like a lot of people, and it is, but it's a fraction of the total number of people in the state. I think it's, what, 3% or less.
It's an abuse of the legislative majority, I think. They tried this once. The governor vetoed it. That's how the process should work. Right to Life flexed its muscles here. They really put their friends in the legislature, the Republican friends, in a really bad place. They gave them a choice of passing it now or having it go automatically on the ballot next fall, which is what would have happened had they rejected it. And they did not want that on the ballot in
right,
2014.
because
Did
again,
Michiganders deserve to vote on this?
Oh, I think so. If we were going to
work.
do it, it should have been by referendum. There's no question in my mind about that. I don't think it's an issue important enough, frankly, to even be on the ballot. This is about a very narrow ideology.
So why did this happen?
Well, again, I think Right to Life was flexing its muscle here. As Steve said, I mean, this is a very small issue. You had a lot of hysterical rhetoric about this, but only 3% of the abortions in Michigan are paid for by insurance. And even women who have that coverage now, and not all policies cover abortion. Many don't. That's a choice that's left to the customer. But even women who have abortion coverage in their insurance policy don't file claims. So this was a very, very small percentage of the abortions.
It's a small issue in that way.
It was unnecessary to even take up.
You said hysterical rhetoric. I think people would argue that it was passionate debate yesterday.
And it's passionate about a very basic individual right that conservatives don't recognize for women, which is to control their own reproductive lives. And so it is Nolan's right in the sense that most people don't ever have occasion to use this part of their insurance, but the idea that they don't have the right to is what has everyone worked up, and they have a right to be there.
But, you know, a good
Nolan.
number of insurance policies don't cover it now, and this was just a case of Right to Life wanting to sort of call allegiance amongst the legislature, put people on the spot and make them stand up and say, you know, I'm with you or I'm against you. This was a ridiculous measure to push. It has so little impact, and yet it's going to cause political problems for the very people they expect to support them.
I was just going to say, last 10 seconds, are Republicans going to pay for this next year?
I don't think they can, because they drew the maps in the legislature. Both the Senate and the House are very solidly Republican. It's going to be very difficult to exact revenge if you're Democrat.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, and that's going to do it for My Week. Make sure you check us out online at MiWeek.org and on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Christy McDonald. Take care. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next Thursday.